Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the founder of Retake Our Democracy with my wife Roxanne and the host of Retake Our Democracy on the radio. Today we will be talking with Augustine Montoya, the 22-year-old Democratic candidate for State House of Representatives representing District 22. District 22 is a very conservative Republican district currently represented by Stephanie Lord. So Augie has a tough road ahead, but he is confident that with a strong local campaign fueled in part by a very large family, half of which is Republican, he can win the race. Apparently, using his large family as campaign ambassadors, Augie has made great inroads throughout the district. We're going to find out more about Augie and his positions and the challenges his campaign faces in District 22 in just a minute. But first, a couple of announcements. Last week, I spoke with Dar Jamail, an internationally recognized climate author who says it is time to realize that we have not done our job and the worst of climate change is now inevitable. So our focus needs to shift to adaptation. We explored his thinking on this and what adaptation could look like on a national, regional, state, local, and personal level, and how he has decided to put his energy into local resilience and community building rather than national activism on climate. It was an extraordinary interview, and I highly recommend it. We wrote a post about it just Wednesday, and have already had quite a number of comments. I want to remind you that if you are driving around and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the page, and you'll land on a chronological list of all of our Zoominars and radio shows. You can binge watch Retake on the Radio for free. Retake is beginning to focus on the 2023 legislative session with a Zoominar series focusing on key issues we hope will become bills and that we will support and initiatives that we will oppose. We kicked off the series last month with a discussion focused on gun violence prevention with Miranda Viscoli, co-president of New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, and Janai Martinez, a student activist from Albuquerque. We discussed what might be possible in 2023 by way of meaningful gun violence prevention legislation and how you can help. Later in July, we discussed modernizing the legislature with Representatives Angelica Rubio from Las Cruces and Cristina Ortiz from Taos. Also on the panel were activists Rick Ann Bach from Indivisible Santa Fe and Kara Lynch, co-founder of Legislative Momentum. There's a strong movement among a group of 10 Democratic women state house members, none of them being Stephanie Lord, to reform the New Mexico legislature with longer sessions, more paid staff, and paid legislators. We are the only state that doesn't pay our legislators. We learned why this reform is needed and how differently the legislature could function if successfully modernized. You can view audio-video recordings of all of our Zoominars at retakeourdemocracy.org under Actions and Events in the homepage banner, where you'll find a link to all of our Zoominars near the top of the page. Don't miss our Zoominar on health security on September 13th and our Zoominar on September 21st on public banking, with details on both of those being available on the Actions and Events page. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this interview on stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of this land. We can learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. Okay, let's meet Augie Montoya. Welcome to the show, Augie.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you to everybody listening. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here on Retake Our Democracy.
Okay, here we go. I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in Democratic politics.
Yes, sir. So prior to my involvement in politics, I actually attended the University of West Alabama, where I ran cross country and track. And that was my freshman year of college. That was when I had just turned old. I had just become old enough to vote. And that was coming up to the presidential elections. After going to the University of West Alabama, I transferred to the University of New Mexico, where I now have my bachelor's degree. But in the process of getting that bachelor's degree here at home, I also changed my away from environmental science and away from biomedical engineering into more pre-law and Chicano studies, which I inevitably graduated with. And so my involvement with Democratic politics started in 2019 when I became chair of the Torrance County Democratic Party. I was 19 at the time, and then inevitably turned around and ran for Torrance County Commission to solve the issues. And so that's how I got my involvement, and that's who I am.
Okay. Why did you decide to run for District 22 House of Representatives? That's a pretty stiff lift.
Yes, sir. So in 2018, I also worked on Jessica Velasquez's campaign when she ran against the current Senator Greg Schmitty's. And then also in 2021, she also ran against Stephanie Lord. And in working on those campaigns, I got to understand the communities in a very different way because I also applied that same information and knowledge to my academics and was able to study it a little deeper. And so I've taken those tools, and now I believe with the redistricting of the district, including the west half of Torrance County, it's a lot more competitive for a candidate with my background. I've worked for the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I've worked for my family business and the House of Representatives. So I've had the opportunity to understand issues such as water sovereignty and equity, infrastructure and roads, as well as responsible economic development. And some of those are the big issues facing New Mexico House District 22, as we do live in a water scarce region that requires a much more comprehensive approach to conservation, and also a representative who's willing to have tough conversations when necessary.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about all three of those issues in just a minute, so hold on with that. Can you describe for our listeners the boundaries for District 22 and how the district was impacted by redistricting? It looks like a huge district.
Yes, sir. So geographically, it is a very big district. I drive it very frequently as I live closer to the central southern portion of the new district. So when you look at a map, you can see that Torrance County and Bernalillo County abut on the northwestern boundary of Torrance and the southeastern boundary of Bernalillo County, just east of the East Mountains or the Sandia Mountains. Our district covers from the northern border of Bernalillo County on the eastern side of the Sandia Mountains all the way down to the southern border of Torrance County. We don't cover any of Santa Fe County. However, we do have the western half of Torrance County, and we do have a couple of neighborhoods and regions in Albuquerque. So it is a very big district with a population of about 30,820, give or take 500.
Okay. So District 22 is fiercely Republican and is represented by well-known Republican conservative incumbent Stephanie Lord. How do you overcome that hurdle to get elected in such a conservative district? And what distinguishes your candidacy from your opponents? Pretty much everything, I think.
It is very interesting. You know, there are areas that we do talk about similarly on website, but I think a little bit different in person. And one of those being water. So in running against Stephanie Lord, that wasn't the initial purpose in running for this district. Yes, Stephanie Lord is the representative. However, with the new redistricting, it's a community that I was born and raised in, and that I've lived the issues as a poor working class person here in the district. And that's what is part of this whole drive to be the representative here, is that I can see these issues in a lot different light because they're impacting people that look and walk and talk and breathe, not just like me, but us as fellow New Mexicans, what makes us such a great community. What sets me aside from my opponent is my observation and take on environmental issues in unison with my observations on the Second Amendment, and further than that, also reproductive rights. So when it comes to the environment, I'm a supporter of the House Joint Resolution 2, the Green Amendment, and I'm a supporter of that amendment because I believe that it allows us to provide the state the authority to step in and correct issues without allotting monetary damages, which is pursuant to Section 1B of that piece of legislation. Further than that, I also believe that when we look at the comprehensive approaches that are necessary for water issues here, and specifically House District 22, we see that we need somebody who understands the programs and agencies, how to get money to those programs and agencies, and also how to make sure that we are doing so with the consciousness that agriculture is a part of this community. And so I think that that does set me aside from Stephanie Lord further, because I also have that deep connection to my community's environment. In unison with that, the Second Amendment. I believe that it is sensible for us to ensure that guns do not get into the hands of people who are not capable or are not in the place to be in possession of that firearm and can cause mass damage. I think that we deserve that right to know that when our kids go to school, that they are protected from things like mass shootings. There is no reason in my junior year of high school I should have been writing about Sandy Hook. It simply shouldn't have happened. And so I think we need to be sensible. We need to be logical in how we approach this. And I think that we need to make sure that the professionals are at the table to help guide this discussion. And then, of course, I believe that anybody with the capacity to for the capacity of pregnancy has the right to make healthcare choices that are best suited to their lives. It's not my business, and I don't keep a list of everybody who chooses to seek reproductive health care. And that's their choice. They deserve to make that choice safely.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad you covered those because I was going to stick on mostly state issues, and that's very helpful. You've clearly done your homework on the Green Amendment.
Thank you.
I need to take a break for a second here to remind our listeners that KSFR is more important than ever in these days of misinformation on the news and social media. They deliver straight news. They deliver Democracy Now. They deliver programming with great local music and culture, and they provide interview shows like this and Here and Now with Dave Morey and so forth. And those are all really good opportunities for you to learn more about the issues impacting New Mexico. But they don't run for free, even if you get to listen for free. They have an expensive studio and they have a staff of engineers and program manager, and those things need to be paid. And so paid for. And so when you're done listening to this show, I'd encourage you to go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button and send them 10, 20, 50 bucks and view it as your ticket for admission to some very good programming. Thank you on behalf of KSFR. So we're back with Augie. What are some of the major issues and most pressing challenges facing the District 22 community? It's kind of odd to even say the District 22 community as wide, as long, and disparate a community as it is. But what is uniquely important to District 22?
So New Mexico House District 22, similar to Northern New Mexico, does have a fire prevention issue. So my family business is fuel wood. We haul firewood to people and we make sure that people are able to heat their homes, which, by the way, the Green Amendment also doesn't ban. That's another thing that's come out, from my opponent's campaign, at least from what I was told, that they're claiming that it prevents fuel firewood burning. Simply not true. But further, when we haul firewood in this area, we see how the fuel loads are impacting the region. And whenever we had the Three Go fire in 2008 and we had the Doghead fire in 2016, it was really an awakening to some of the organizations and departments here, whether that was federally or at the state level, to see that we need to lower fuel loads. And so they've been working very hard to do that here on this end of the mountain. But I believe in the Sandia portion, we need to also be working hard with our federal delegation in unison with all necessary professionals to ensure that we are preventing fire. And that's one of the big issues. There's two other ones that are major in the area, including things like, of course, water accessibility, sovereignty and equity. And then in unison with that, also transportation and food security. Those are two issues that kind of come up with the groups of people that I'm in communication with and the members of our community that I've talked to.
You mentioned forest management, or at least fuel management in forests. And I'm sure you know that the U.S. Forest Service didn't exactly do us any favors in northern New Mexico and the fires near Las Vegas and Mora. I'm assuming that your position on trying to reduce the fuel sources within the forest would be respective of, working locally, not relying on the feds to do this for us.
I totally agree. My whole community is, well, in the Torrance County and Mountain region, we have a lot of fuel wood and firewood haulers, of which I have many in the family. I'm generational. And I think that if we turn to the communities here locally, we can find ways to ensure that we're preventing forest fires and also respect and maintain the lands. One of the biggest things that I talk about whenever I communicate about fuel firewood is that naturally, in a natural setting, the forest would be maintained by things like natural burning wildfires. However, with climate change, we're seeing an excessive amount of those. And in living in this space and wanting to utilize things like hiking and looking to prevent and suppress wildfires, we also have to be responsible and good stewards to the land in that process. And I think fuel firewood and other fuel management systems and avenues are appropriate aside from the federal government in and of itself.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the issues that you mentioned on your campaign website. You identified three key issues which you want to focus on: water sovereignty and equity, responsible economic development, and infrastructure and roads. So we're going to take a look at each one of those separately. First, in relation to water sovereignty and equity, how and why do you combine water sovereignty and equity in the same goal? And specifically, what does water sovereignty look like if it honors equity?
Most definitely. Thank you for the question. For me, I put water sovereignty and equity together because I believe that we are sovereign whenever we purchase that water. If we purchased an allotment of water with our water rights, with our property, if we own them. And here in House District 22, we see many members of our community losing access to water as a result of, yes, climate change, but also things like misappropriations of water or overuse and misuse. And so I want to make sure that when you purchase a piece of property in the state of New Mexico, if you buy a certain amount of acreage feet of water, as you do with your water right, that you are able to access that, because right now that's something that's being stripped away from my communities. And in unison with that, equity, sovereignty respects equity because if we purchase that amount of water, we are given that amount of water on an equitable basis, but that we're also paying respects to the people who have currently lost their wells, and that we're working to make sure that they also have access to water, whether that's working to import water to the region, or if that is making sure that we are being conscious in the way that we conserve and protect this finite natural resource. And so that's why I put those two together. And I think that they kind of, in this instance, are a bit mutually exclusive.
Okay. How about in relation to economic development? What would responsible economic development look like, and what is irresponsible economic development?
For me, responsible economic development is ensuring that we are looking at the big picture. Yes, we do have to make sure that in the short term, we do have the ability to keep the lights on in the state of New Mexico, but we also have to make sure that we're able to do that through the foreseeable future. We see that in areas like education, mental and behavioral health, areas that are really hurting in rural New Mexico. And with answering any of these questions, that's the perspective I do take. So if it sounds like I don't necessarily see that in my neighborhood and somebody's listening in perhaps an urban community, it's a little bit different in rural New Mexico, and we do have resource issues. And so that's why I bring it up in this perspective. And so for me, responsible economic development in a rural setting is ensuring that Main Street businesses have consistent access to a workforce and making sure that we're doing everything possible to give them the resources to establish themselves in the community and then continue to sustain past the initial 5 years to really be established.
Okay. Okay. What does irresponsible economic development look like? Specific, if you could be specific, a kind of business or whatever.
Most definitely. So, irresponsible economic development, and we've seen it here in this region a little bit, is making investments on the behalf of the constituents of the state of New Mexico that don't make a return, and that oftentimes can prove to be a little bit cumbersome whenever it comes to funding other programs because it's assumed so many resources. A good example is we have La Jolla, the wind farms here in Torrance County, and our local county commission has invested a large sum of money into these wind farms in the aims of providing funding to our schools and the means of taxes, and then also making sure that we're employing local people, and then also that we get a kickback from that energy. Well, in some instances it worked, and in some instances it didn't. So it fell into a more of an aggressive incentive structure where there wasn't necessarily the regulation in the initial contracting to make sure that they were held responsible and accountable for what they were going to owe the county and the communities. And so, for example, with this, we seen when it came to employment, a lot of the employees who work for these wind farms are not necessarily from the communities and not even necessarily from the state of New Mexico. And so if there would have been a provision in the contract somewhere, whenever I seen it, I didn't see that there was one in there. I could be wrong, but there should be some form of a regulation on the back end. So it's more of a cooperative incentive structure between that incentivization with monies as well as that regulation on the end of showing up on their promises. And so that's one particular example here to Torrance County. But in my observation, that's also irresponsible economic development.
It's a good example, and it's the kind of thing, I don't know if you know, Retake is very involved in the public power initiative statewide. And one of the things that would do is put it in public hands, the development of things like these wind farms, and they be managed by a cooperative or a private, but a board of directors that comes from the community that would make sure that the local people were hired, revenues go to the local community and so forth. So it'll be very interesting. There's going to be legislation introduced in 2023 when hopefully you'll be there to vote for it. Okay. So on your website, you state that you are strongly opposed to industries that exploit our communal poverty or hollow out our Main Street businesses and families. Can you give a few examples of industries that do this to your community? And can you offer an example or two of positive, sustainable economic development efforts that you would support?
Most definitely. So, extractive industries include things like fossil fuel industry as well as private prisons. And that's going to make me extremely unpopular with some people because they do employ people here in Torrance County, not necessarily fossil fuels, but private prisons, because we have a private prison in Estancia. And the reason that I am so vehemently opposed to private prisons is because of the standard of care in unison with the way that they are structured. I believe that if we are going to work to really solve a crime problem, you don't lock people up and then pay somebody billions of dollars for giving them scraps at the end of the table. You really look into solving the problems of those individuals. And it's impacted my community because out in my community, I went to school with some of these people who ended up drug abusers, and they are great people. They just lack opportunity and other resources necessary to allow them to succeed. Some instances, they've made this choice because of healthcare reasons. And rather than finding real solutions, we lock them up in prisons, and people profit immensely off of the poor care of these people. And so that's why I stand so vehemently opposed to private prisons and want to find new ways of creating economic development, such as business incubators and other programs. Sorry.
I just want to inject that one of the things I really appreciate, I don't know you very well, Augie. I just met you at a meet and greet for the Rural Caucus and the Veterans Caucus a week ago. And we didn't have a chance to talk too much, but in just this conversation, you're certainly not just spouting the kinds of positions that are going to ring true initially in your community. You're standing up for your principles, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. I really appreciate. I was raised in an environment where you speak the truth, even if it is to power, and in doing so, you do it honestly and you do it respectfully. And so, in standing on my principles, I understand that there are going to be people who disagree, but I'm also not afraid of having those really hard to have discussions as well.
Okay, well, great. We need more of you in the legislature. In relation to infrastructure and roads, what are the most pressing needs for infrastructure and improved roads in District 22? And what would you do in the legislature to improve that situation?
Most definitely. So we have a couple of different networks of roads. We have municipal roads, county roads, state roads. And so in my observation, we need to make sure that there is available monies to help with the repair and in some instances overhaul of roads in the southern portion of New Mexico House District 22. And I say that because there are areas where the roads have been so severely neglected that it's kind of like driving around in a washing machine. So every time you hit a bump, you're just going on to the next bump. And so that's something that not only has come up on the doors, but in living here my whole life, particularly in this south central portion of the district, I've gotten to see. And it's a unanimous issue as well with infrastructure. And so it resonates with a lot of my community in unison. But whenever it comes to the northern part of the district, up in Bernalillo County, to some extent, it's more of a maintaining and ensuring that access to that infrastructure. And then in unison with roads and fixing and maintaining our roads, we also need to make sure that people have access to transportation. I work my best to help with people who need access to getting to Albuquerque to go to the doctor. I take my neighbor, speaking of which, I have to take her tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning to go get some work done. And this is part of that infrastructure. if we had transportation, people could get to the doctor, they'd be healthier, they'd be able to go to work, and then they'd be able to help invest back into the economy. It's interconnected. And this also comes with the need for us to have healthcare infrastructure out here so that it lessens our loads on the dependence on that transportation to get to Albuquerque. Uh, when I sat back and studied some of this stuff in college, it really revealed to me how interconnected these issues are. Because, for example, environment, which is a little bit off topic, um, environment's interconnected with education because you have to have people who are educated to better maintain those forests if we're going to continue to suppress fires. But then whenever they're employed, they also give back to the economy. So it's all interlocked.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, Augie. So how about if you tell our listeners where they can get more information on how they can help your campaign or just find out more information about your campaign?
Most definitely. So you can find me on social media at either Facebook or Instagram at Augustine, the number 4NM. You can find me on TikTok at ANM, the number 4NM. And then you can also find me on Twitter at ANM, the number 4NM, or my website, ANM, the number 4NM at gmail.com. Or ANM4NM.com. Sorry about that. That's also my email. So feel free to send me an email if you need me.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me today. And we're going to continue this discussion and we're going to have some big topics. We're going to talk about gas and oil. We're going to talk about hydrogen. And we're going to talk about some of the positions of Stephanie Lord. You'll want to check that out on our retake on the radio at retakeourdemocracy.org. It'll be posted, actually it'll be posted well before the show airs. So if you're listening to the show and we cut out on before we discuss those issues, when you get home, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on Retake on the Radio, and you can watch this program. Thank you again, Augie, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody listening. I appreciate this opportunity.
Okay, we're back, and this is just the YouTube recording of our show, so it won't be airing on KSFR. Unfortunately, sometimes I have all the tough questions at the end of the interview, and the radio people don't get a chance to hear it. But here goes question on gas and oil. As I'm sure you know, New Mexico is inordinately dependent on the revenue from gas and oil industries, whose operations are a major contributor to climate change and a major employer in our state. Many young people in New Mexico feel it is time for the state to take a stand, resist the pleas of gas and oil lobbyists, and find a way to diversify its revenues, reduce its reliance on gas and oil, and reduce our emissions. Where do you stand on this issue?
So I was recently endorsed by Yucca, New Mexico. My opponent's had a heyday with that one, as she's a big supporter and accepts a lot of money from big oil and big gas. It's my observation that we need to work very hard to diversify our budget, because it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also responsible. When you have all your eggs in one basket, there's a higher percentage that something could go wrong in that instance and you lose everything. We see it with the peaks and valleys of how the fuel industry works, where you have big booms and busts. And so I think it's responsible for us to diversify the budget away from just a reliance on fossil fuel and natural gas. And then further than that, we need to do everything possible to ensure that we are cutting emissions. And the best example I can use of that is whenever I'm talking to people who are pro gas and oil, I ask them, well, would you breathe air that comes out of a muffler, or would you be willing to breathe that in? Because that's essentially, well, not essentially, that is what's being trapped in our air, is this refuse. And so we have to do everything possible to ensure that we are being good stewards of the land and in good relationship with the planet that we call home.
Okay. We haven't spoken much about your opponent, Stephanie Lord, the incumbent. What about her positions and votes do you feel voters need to know? How would you differ from those positions?
So me and my opponent differ on a number of positions. First off, with, of course, HJR2, with the Green Amendment, she's gone around telling people and misinforming them that fuel firewood is going to be prevented under this and it's going to cost the states millions because of this Green Amendment. And it's simply not true. In unison with not wanting to spread misinformation and supporting the Green Amendment, I also think that there are essential pieces of legislation like House Bill 22, where people are afforded the opportunity to have a translator in state departments that I think are essential. There was an entire reporting process outlined in that, a request process outlined to that in that legislation to the governor to get these people to state departments to allow people like my family in some instances who don't speak English to be able to access these state departments. And she voted against that. And just simply put, I think that my opponent is more focused on the gun violence agenda and sitting and rallying and rattling the cages about something that we properly need to understand and to prevent future gun violence. She's sitting there rallying against this rather than actually looking at the issues that we need to solve. And so I think that's how me and my opponent differ the most.
Okay. One of the hottest issues in the 2022 legislation session was the governor's hydrogen production initiative. It will certainly be on the agenda in 2023. So what I'd like to know is, have you formed an opinion on hydrogen as a technology that we should be investing in? And if so, please share why you support or oppose this effort. If you haven't formed an opinion yet, please tell me what you need to know in order to form an opinion.
Most definitely. So I seen with Hydrogen Hub that there was an attempt to get federal monies as a result of getting Hydrogen Hub here. However, I do stand opposed to Hydrogen Hub. I don't necessarily think that it is the best thing to be doing for our environment as it consumes natural gas. And I also think that we have better things to do with our time than to give handouts to the oil and gas industry. But I would always appreciate the opportunity to have more information and to better educate myself on the issue.
Well, I encourage you to read our next blog because we're going to be doing a deep dive on hydrogen. So last question, well, not actually the last question. Last question is to give people information about your canvassing. But can you give us your 2-minute campaign speech? Why should District 22 constituents vote for you?
House District 22 constituents should vote for me, Augie Montoya, because my connection to this community means that I am available, I'm accessible, and I'm willing to fight for us in the Santa Fe legislature and the New Mexico legislature in a different way. Meaning that if you need to get a hold of me, most of the constituents know where I live, or they can come to find out very quickly where I live by asking around. And I am willing to sit down and have these discussions with you and involve the communities in this creation of legislation to better represent our communities.
Okay. Well, thank you. And the actual last question is, do you have canvassing and phone banking operations going on right now? And where can people find out how they can join that effort?
I do, and there are a couple of different ways. So we're getting ready to release our forms on our social media to sign up. So if you want to go to my social media pages and follow me, and then also fill out that sign up form, you can sign up to volunteer depending on what you want to do. And then in unison with that, you can also give me a call at 505-620-4539. Or you can also send me an email at anm4nm@gmail.com.
Okay. So this has been a great show, Augie. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to know you more, and look forward to talking to you again and seeing if we can't get some of our folks to support your campaign. And good luck with it. Good luck with it. Thank you very much.
So very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.